Our God is still on his throne and ruling the affairs of man. Even as he does not change, his truths have not changed. Thankfully, God still has a people which proclaim that old-time religion, setting forth his sovereignty, and the old paths of truth where we can find rest for our souls. Welcome to Word of Sovereign Grace, a ministry of Paradise Primitive Baptist Church in Arlington, Texas. Get your Bible, call your friends, and sit back as we open the King James Scriptures to explore the glorious Word of Sovereign Grace. Here's this week's message.
I counted a statement made by Solomon as he spoke by divine inspiration. It's recorded in the 30th chapter of the book of Proverbs. You'll be familiar with this passage. I want to read it and then possibly read some other scriptures to try to tie in with this. I hope I can do that. I hope you'll be mindful of me. Solomon said in the 24th verse of Proverbs chapter 30 that there be four things which are little upon the earth, but are exceeding wise. And then he named them here in this particular incident. The ants are a people not strong, yet they prepare their meat in summer. The Coneys are but a feeble folk, yet they make their houses in the rocks. The locusts have no king, yet go they forth all of them by bands. The spider taketh hold with her hands, and is in kings' palaces. Now he has mentioned four things here that are very small upon the earth of God's creatures, in the lower order of his kingdom and his creation. And we could spend a lifetime and never really understand the wisdom of these, what we would consider insignificant creatures. Yet I feel like if we indulged ourselves in that alone, that possibly we could become more involved in the observation and the notice of the creation more than the Creator, as was the case with the Egyptians and with the Lord's people from time to time. But I read that to call your attention to another passage of Scripture, and then I hope to come back to this. But I call your attention now to the 104th Psalm. I may read and be somewhat lengthy here, but it may be hard to stop. I want us to look, first of all, at the God of creation. And I'll be sincere with you. I love this 104th Psalm, but I read that recently almost for the first time and saw some things here. Our daughter is a student in one of the university, and this year they have her raising a garden. And she's having a terrible time clearing the field and having to remove certain types of worms and things like that, but that's all part of it. And I read this and I thought, just about any course that we might engage ourselves in, about any walk of life, any vocation, the 104th Psalm, we will find God involved in it very actively. Whether it's the agriculture or astronomy or whatever. And that's not news, I know, but it sort of brings it to focus here in the 104th Psalm. Now, you You notice some of this as we read, and I'll just say this one more remark. We hear so much, and in our own conversation we refer to the laws of nature. Always the laws of nature. But I think we would do well to remember that God is the God of nature, and not let that slip by. Because the very fact that there is a law implies that there is a lawgiver. And surely we would not join the ranks of those who would at least tell us that it was just be sort of like putting everything in a bag and shaking it up and it came out right. We couldn't quite go that way. But if there's a lawgiver, there's a law enforcer. So we must give our all tribute to the God of all grace and the God of nature. Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, thou art very great. Now I'll just say this, if we didn't know anything else, didn't learn anything else, and we just learned this for the first time, we'd know something about this God. He is very great. Honor, he is clothed, thou art clothed with honor and majesty, who coverest thyself with light as a garment, who stretcheth out the heavens like a curtain, who layeth the beams of his chambers in the waters, who maketh the clouds his chariot, who walketh upon the wings of the wind, who maketh his angels spirits his ministers of flaming fire, who laid the foundations of the earth that it should not be removed forever, who coverest it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains, and thou rebuked, they fled at thy voice, at the voice of thy thunder, they hasted away. They go up by the mountains, they go down by the valleys, unto the place which thou hast founded for them. Thou hast set a bound that they may not pass over, that they turn not again to cover the earth. He sendeth the springs into the valleys which run among the hills. They give drink to every beast of the field. The wild asses quench their thirst. By them shall the fowls of the heaven have their habitation, which sing among the branches. He watereth the hills and his chambers from his chambers. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of thy works. He causeth the grass to grow for the cattle, the herb for the service of man, that he may bring forth food out of the earth. So we see God involved in his way. And I just want to make one comment on the 14th verse here. Don't want to spend much time here, but I want to make a comment here. He causeth the grass to grow for the cattle, the herb for the service of man, that it might bring forth food out of the earth. I don't know if you're aware of this or not. I'm sure you are. But we attended a meeting of sorts last week, and one evening, a very informative meeting. And part of the meeting, one of the topics was a briefing on a little movement that's going on in the country. It's here and there, and it's called the Animal Rights Movement and Commission. Now I'm going to tell you, that thing is going to get out of hand if something isn't done about it. And right here we find what the earth is for. That the herbs and the cattle, they're for the use of men, mankind, if you please. And there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, there's misuse and abuse, and I think the people involved in that particular engagement are the tender-heartedest of people when it comes to taking care of their animals and their livestock. But we're going to hear a lot more about that. But this is sort of focuses back on what things are all about. And wine that maketh glad the heart of man, and oil that maketh his face to shine, bread which strengthens man's heart. The trees of the Lord are full of sap, the cedars of Lebanon which he hath planted. where the birds make their nest, as for the storks the fir trees are their house. The high hills are refuge for wild goats, and the rocks for the Coneys. Now, that's through verse 18. I hope you will again read this chapter, but read all the way to the 35th verse. It's almost too good to quit there, but it gives us God's providential care over the works of his hand, and he still today opens his hand and satisfieth the desire of all of his creatures. And he opens his hand and even feeds the young ravens when they cry. Now, when we consider that the wisdom of God and his, we might call it superintendence over his creation, and we read over here where we began to read about the wisdom of these small creatures being exceeding wise, then all of the praise and the glory goes to God for maintaining these creatures. Now, there be four things which are little upon the earth, but they are exceeding wise. And then he talks about the ant. I just want to say a little bit about that. The wisest man that ever lived, with the exception of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, in the 6th chapter of this wonderful book of Proverbs, in the 6th verse, said, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise." Now, I don't know if you know where an anthill is or not. Has the fire ant got up here yet? Boy, you don't want him up here. He is a mean creature. We have them, and they're almost impossible to live with. In some cases, we can't. They're killing calves and everything. But I know where an anthill is. If you can't find one in Brother Nowlin's front yard, there's an anthill over there. It's called the red ant. One time I read that Proverbs 6:6, and I really thought about what was being said. The wisest man that ever lived, with the exception of Christ, he didn't say go to the university or go to the academy, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but he said to be wise, to go to the ant and consider her ways, or that is, diligently look at it and study it and be wise. Now, the thought went through my mind like this. I've never done that. And if he said to do it, he must have known what he was talking about. I don't believe he was just using an analogy here. So I went and found me a red anthill and began to look at it and study it. And the next thing I had to do was go to the library and get me a book. That's been about 30 years ago, and I'm not through yet. There is something about that that's absolutely amazing. Because the ant adheres to the innate wisdom that God gave it to maintain itself. If you'll stop to think about it, and I'm sure you have, and this won't be a new statement, that every problem that can come up or has come up or that is existent today in our society, in our lives, in our own lives, the very principle of our own lives, in our institutions, that is causing problem is because of a departure from the principle of this book. I can't think of a one. Now, I know there are innocent bystanders. I know there are innocent people suffer because of other things that somebody else did. I realize that, but nevertheless, basically, even in our economy, when troubles come, it's because of a departure from this book. And, you know, I never had the privilege, and I've said this many times before at our church at home, I never had the privilege of meeting or being with a man, possibly most of y'all knew him. His name was O. Strickland, as I recall. I heard him preach 3 times, and one time I heard him say that this Bible will make a better anything out of you if you'll study it. And take it in the proper context, that's right. It'll make better farmers out of us. I read one time where he that observeth the clouds will not sow. There's all kind of excuses for not working, but this Bible will make a better anything out of us in honorable engagements and honorable intentions. But when we depart from this book, it causes friction in our life. It causes problems, and the only way we can get back on track, as it were, is when we go back to this book. So we come to the ant, and we begin to think about that. There's always activity there. And I just want to say this. I don't want to spend too much time on the ant. But on that anthill, in the down inside and all around, there is the most organized activity you could ever believe when you really study about it. And when that ant is born and comes into full being, if you please, it knows it has something to do. It knows there's something for it to do. Now that ought to tell us something. Work, a job, a vocation isn't a curse. God gave Adam some duties before sin ever entered into the world, and that was to dress and to keep the garden. So work isn't something bad. Work isn't a curse. It is a blessing. And it causes and it makes for a society, if everybody would work and do their own work and not try to steal, we wouldn't have any thievery going on. But work isn't a plague upon mankind. So when the ant comes into being, it knows it's supposed to do something. But it doesn't necessarily know exactly what it's supposed to do. That comes by training, believe it or not. And you know what is frightening when we stop to think and really look at the situation as it is? We realize that God is still in control, but we're building up something in our mind, in society's mind, and for the last 3 generations, best I can figure it out, do you know that we have people in the 3rd generation now? I'm talking about married people of marriage age and so forth, that have never drawn a paycheck. Now, I'm not talking about people disadvantaged because of physical disabilities, but I'm talking about through a system that has supported the grandparents and the parents and the children until the family has broken down, and it has been derided, and it has been looked upon as something that's outdated, and there is no orderly process. There is a feeling that the check's supposed to be there from somebody, somewhere. It's supposed to come every month. And please don't misunderstand me. In the land that we live in, we are so blessed in God's providence. In our affluence, in our wealth, in the things that He's given us to maintain ourselves, we shouldn't have a hungry person that's really hungry and a person that's really sick. They ought to be taken care of. And I believe with all of my heart that the Lord's people's heart is moved toward that. But there must be some effort put forth. And what I wanted to get to here was just look at the ant for a minute. It comes forth, it knows it's supposed to, it has a job. Finally, it will find that job. And she gathereth her meat in the summer. There is a principle here for the Lord's people that will guide us every day. We are to be frugal. We are to be industrious. And I personally believe, and I do not want to be presumptuous in this, but I believe that our people, the people who have been taught the doctrines and the practice of this Bible, not only limited to our people, please understand that, but certainly there's a great feeling among our people for honesty. I know that everybody's human and we're all of that, but as a group and as a people, our people are honest, they're hardworking, their name and their word has been their bond, and but that doesn't just come, without some effort put forth. The ant gathers her meat in the summer. And there's maybe a spiritual application here. It requires some industry, some effort on the part of every one of us. All of us who came here today did some gathering, some activity, some working, some planning to get here. And surely there may be a time from the spiritual application. We don't know. We do not read God's mind, but in His kind providence, how He leads His people, there may be something that you would get this evening from the message, or reading the Bible, or talking, or a song, or a hymn, or the fellowship of the people, that sometime when it becomes winter time of life, that it would be like gathering meat back because of the activity that is here. But down deep in the anthill, there's some activity when we don't even see it. When the snow is here, and when the hill is covered over, to walk out and to look at it, you wouldn't even know it was there. But down in there, there's a garden growing, the fungus is growing, and they're gathering it, and they're taking care of everything, and everything is going good. But that didn't just happen by accident. It caused some effort and some labor. And this, like your meeting here, this didn't just come together haphazardly. There had to be some prayer, and there had to be some preparation. But I want to just touch on this, and I must hurry along. When that ant goes about, when it first goes out and to engage in this activity, it has a lot of help. And one of the things that's almost comical to me, and I don't mean to make light of that, is the zeal that the ant has. I mean, it is ready to go. And you know, most of the Lord's people are that way. When they see His goodness and see His grace and feel how good He's been to them, they're ready to go, but they don't always know what to do. But there's an answer to that, and even go to the anthill and we can find the answer. When that little ant is hatched and goes and gets ready, and the worker ant, there are all kinds of them. Now, there's a few drones. They're necessary, the fewer the better. But nevertheless, this worker ant, he goes out and he knows instinctively, and that wasn't by accident. He knows instinctively that he's supposed to go and get something and bring it back to the anthill. That's his job. He knows that. It's just instinctively. God has maintained that, and that is inherent in them. He goes out to get something. And you know, I've seen a lot of the Lord's people like that. They just see the Lord and they feel His goodness, and they just grab anything that's going along. Haven't you seen that? Some of them try to talk in tongues, and some of them try to do this because they think they're supposed to, and somebody said they could, and they tried, and then it won't work. It's just not what they thought it was. But he goes out, and he's the worker ant. He's the worker ant. You look at National Geographic, they have a lot of this. So he goes out working, and he gets something. And it may just happen to be the wrong thing. It doesn't have any business down there. It may be a little piece of dirt, maybe, that was just carried out. But I tell you one thing, it is bent on getting that back down into that anthill. And here he comes. He doesn't waste any time. He comes back to the anthill and starts, and just inside, there is believe it or not, I didn't get that from Ripley either, there's a guard ant down there. He's standing guard. And when that ant comes in and he looks at that and he sees it could be a seed that would grow down there and just mess up everything. He turns him right around and sends him back with it. Can't come in with that. No, can't bring that in here. That's the sole intent. And so you know what the little ant does? He just turns around and takes it back outside again. Now, isn't that something? That's not by accident. Thousands of years and thousands of species, and go to Africa, go to Muleshoe, go over in front of Brother Nallen's house and watch that one, and they all have the same characteristic. It wasn't by accident. So he goes out and he gets something else. And he comes in with it. It may be worse than what he had the first time, but he's sincere in it. He's sending him right back out again. Maybe the third or the fourth or maybe the sixth time he finally hits on what they're bringing in, And he comes in and he's allowed admittance into the anthill. No more problem. He knows what to do now. He works at it. He goes and he works and he brings it in. Now, can't you see something in that? Many times we have people just a sincere. Let me tell you what we had at Stratton one time. Now, we have to be careful and not hurt people's feelings. We have to be gentle. But we had a family came and visited us one time at the church of Stratton. And, of course, we didn't have a piano. And immediately after service, they called the friend that they were mutual acquaintance and said, Brother so-and-so, we would like to donate a piano to your church. Thinking that we were so poor we couldn't afford one, they wanted to donate us one. Now, you know that could have gone either way. But we expressed, or the brother expressed appreciation, then told why we didn't have one. But now what if he had said, well, that's a good brother. Now I'm telling you, we're going to hurt his feelings if we don't take that piano. Let's just take it, we'll try to cover it up and not mess with it except just when he's around. No, that's not the way to do it, is it? You doesn't ruin somebody. Somebody figured out that they've got the answer to all the problems and all the weaknesses, the apparent weaknesses of the old church, so they're going to do something else. But I'm going to tell you something. There's always the human frailty getting involved. Don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and Lord help us to be gentle and not do that. To be firm like this ant does but finally when they bring the right thing, everything goes good. And there's so much to be said about that. They gather their meat in summer. Let me give you another illustration that I read, and this frightened me. Sort of. It struck reality, and I don't want to stay too much on this ant. But you know, there are different species of ants, and those ants don't always like one another. Some of the greatest battles, the most fierce battles ever fought is by ants. Do you know that? Now they have slave ants. There's ants, they have their own little milk cows down there. They're aphids that they get the extract from. They do all these things. But there is one kind of ant. Now he's dangerous. He goes over and visits another anthill. I wrote something about this the other day, and you may have read it. But it just amazes me. He goes over and visits another anthill. Now they recognize one another by scent. They have a recognition system. And what he does, he's on a mission. He's on a definite mission. He's going over to visit that anthill, but he's not up there to help him out, I'll tell you one thing. He goes over, and usually they recognize him and they kill him. Right there, he's killed and hauled out to the cemetery. The ant won't let anything dead stay in the hill. You see, they're undertakers working all the time. That's their job. And there may be something to learn there too. But sometimes this ant will go to that host hill, and the ants outside, before they know it, they're accustomed to him by scent. And the next thing you know, he's in the hill. He's accepted. He's one of them. He's just one of them, and there's no way to detect him. Now this is a fact. He works his way down to the queen's chamber. And when he gets to the queen's chamber, what do you think he does? He kills the queen. Now after the queen is killed, how long do you think the hill lasts? What happens when the queen is killed, then all of the buddies of this one that's done his job, that's just what he's supposed to do, go kill the queen. Then all the others come in, and I forgot, within like 3 or 4 days, or however long it takes them without reproduction, maybe it's 3 or 4 weeks, the original hill is gone. The original hill is gone, and the enemy ants have completely taken over. Completely taken over. No resemblance. Still got the same hill. I went up to Stockdale, Texas, some time ago for a funeral. And for some reason or other, Stockdale has always amazed me when I study her history. When I study her history and find that at one time, before the war, in the 20s and the 30s, when I guess cotton and everything, rural type agriculture was flourishing, there was a Primitive Baptist church there. And we don't have a church there now. And I visited with the funeral director. And by the way, that wasn't a Primitive Baptist funeral I had. And he said, yeah, I buried all the old Baptist, Primitive Baptists. They're all gone now. And you know, one of the hardest things for me to get through my head, where there's been a thriving Primitive Baptist church, one of the hardest things for me to get through my head is that I can't go back there and talk to Primitive Baptists or descendants of Primitive Baptists, and they're just as excited about that as I am. My friend, when it is dead, it is dead. I mean, it is gone. But there's another group there that's got the name. And I couldn't figure that out until I read the history of that old church, and then I figured it out. But they are not even related to the Primitive Baptists today. You see what I'm saying? Because the hill, the mound was taken over and the name was kept, but the original ants are gone, and there's though there's a little similarity in practice and a little bit of the doctrine, but you see what I'm saying? They have a reason. Sometimes people say, oh, Baptists are too picky. My friend, we need to be careful, and I want to emphasize that. Paul said in the book of Jude, when I gave all diligence to write unto you of the common salvation, that ye should earnestly contend for the faith which was once delivered to the saints. It is not an easy task. It's not a one-day-a-week job. It's a 7-day-a-week vocation to contend for the faith which was once delivered for the saints. And the word contend there means to struggle. Now that doesn't mean to go out and take somebody by the throat. My friend, that doesn't mean to get a sword. But I'm going to tell you, you have learned that it is a struggle to contend for the faith. It's not always a hard job, but there's always a watchfulness about it. Always time to be watchful. And you know that you earnestly contend for the faith or religious truth that was once delivered to the saints. That word contend to me is very interesting. Under the Greek, under the Roman Empire, they had their stadiums, and for entertainment, to gratify the flesh, they had all kinds of cruel things. Read the 11th chapter of Hebrews. You find it happening to the Lord's people. But they had what would be called an agony. Now we have the word agony, but the word agony there was when someone would go in to the arena and maybe be, as Paul said, sewn up in sheepskin and goatskin. That was a practice. But when they would be turned out into the gladiators or to the lions or the wild beast. Now this is a historical fact. It has no, I don't think there's any prejudice to it at all. But history tells us that they would line up those entrance ways. Those amphitheaters is what I'm trying to say. Bigger than the Astrodome. One the same size of the Astrodome. And those people would come in for sport. And they would line the walkways with people. They would cover them with pitch. They would set them on fire. They would become torches for these people to march between. And so the depravity of man, when it comes to the full, there is nothing to compare with it. We don't have that, but that was called an agony. They would endure an agony in the arena. Our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ in the book of Luke, as you know, he was in an agony. He was in an agony. But the same word is used here, that we contend, and sometimes there is a great contention for the faith, the religious truth, which was once delivered to the saints. And so there may be times when in our own way we must be like the ant. We must gather our meat in season, and we must store it. I tell you, I believe there is one of the greatest blessings in the life of the child of God. We are told that if we cast our bread upon the waters, that this will return to us. And every day we're going through a span called time. And I have never been able to define time. I wish I could define time. But I know that once it is gone, it doesn't come back. It is gone. And today is the most precious day, the only day, if I could say, that we have. And so it is what we do today that may tend to strengthen us tomorrow or to weaken us tomorrow. And let me say this. I am as convinced as I can be that the things which we do today, I'm talking about personally, from a business standpoint or anything else, and surely from a church standpoint, the things that a church do today determines to a great extent the state of that church a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, and on down the road. It determines it, because we can go and we can find history where certain errors have been injected into the church. Years ago, my friends, they were injected as sour grapes. And today, the children's teeth are set on edge because somebody else injected sour grapes way back yonder, and we don't need any more sour grapes. We need the sweetness of the kingdom of God. And so we see here as we look at these things, and the Coneys are a feeble folk. I suppose that maybe there are different definitions for the Coney, but the best one I can see as I try to study, it's like a little hare, a little rabbit. And I read about it in the 104th Psalm. It says, as for the he-goat, he makes his refuge in the mountains, and the coney in the rocks. And there's a characteristic that is not unknown, and you're not unfamiliar with, I'm sure, about the coney. The reason that he makes his home in the rocks and his refuge is because he's not able to build his own house. He has to use a house that's been built for him. And my friend, when we look at this and some spiritual application, we find here a pure description of a subject of God's grace who has been stripped of all of his self-esteem, who's been stripped of all of our ego and all of these things, and made to see what we are. By nature, my friend, we are nothing and less than nothing, and cast upon the dunghills of this life. But when we see and we're made to believe by the sweet assuring grace of the Spirit of God that he has made a place for us, my friend, we then can understand and appreciate and become a friend to the coney, who makes his house in the rock, and his hands are tender and his arms are short. He can't make his own house. And there is something about this that will guide us all through life. You know, it's been with me, I don't want to be personal in this, but I am thoroughly convinced that man is totally depraved. I can just look in every direction and see verification of that. Don't have to even look too far to find it. People killing and slaughtering and things that's going on in this world. And then on the other hand, we don't want to become egotistical in ourselves and say, look at us, we're above everybody else. But we find over here that God has given us a house, that He has made provision for us. When I think that the Son of God, who came to this earth and tabernacled, as John said in verse 14 of John 1, I believe, among us, we beheld His glory. And when I have been made to know by the sweet assurance of the Spirit of God that He did not come to this earth to make our eternal salvation a possibility, as I was once taught and tried to advocate, but that he came to make it a certainty. And I look and see myself as not capable of lifting myself from the ground by my own strength, and feel surely that by his sovereign grace he has lifted me up and placed me in the rock. I become a brother to the Coneys, and there I rest because I cannot build my own house. There's a song that's in the book, and every time I think about it, for years before I knew the history of it, it always struck my soul. Augustus M. Toplady, walking back in the terrible storm, a terrible storm. I'm talking about a downpour, a lightning storm, and all those stepped inside a rock on his way back from an appointment at church. He stepped inside the rock, and there he said it was like the storm had just abated. But he looked out, and the storm was still raging. He looked out, and the waters were coming down, and he looked, and he saw the lightning bolt. And he said, there is the vengeance of God. There is the law of God thundering against the sinner. And there he wrote that song in the calmness of the rock. He wrote that song, all the labors of my hands cannot fulfill thy law's demands. When we see that and know it to some degree of assurance within, we become like the Coney. The Locust have no king, yet go forth they all of them by bands. I am so sorry to say this, but what time did I start?
Doesn't matter, go ahead.
I'll bring my remarks to a close. I very seldom do that. I always watch the time, but I was not watching this evening. The locusts have no king, yet go they forth all of them by bands. I think this is really something to consider. It will follow us also. It will guide us in our life. Have you ever been asked this question out of sincerity? And in most cases, I take all questions directed to me as being sincere questions until I'm convinced otherwise. But have you ever been asked this question, where is the headquarters for your church? Where's your headquarters? Now, I read one time in a book when I was searching for the truth that our headquarters was in Thornton, Arkansas. Now, how we got there, I don't know. And the folks in Thornton don't know. That's in some of our census books. But to find that the Church of God is one of the outstanding miracles of the day. First of all, one of the greatest miracles is that we have this Bible, 1611 King James. If we just knew for a moment the war that had been waged against that book, we would probably go hide a bunch of them just in case somebody did it again. I mean, there have been many lives lost because of that. It's been taped up under chairs in the United States of America in the frontier days. It's been taped up under there so when the priests came they wouldn't see them reading it. All kinds of things, but we have it intact. And one of the next greatest miracles is the church. Can you imagine this? They're sort of like the locust. They go forth in bands yet having no king. Certainly there is a king for the church of God, but it's not an earthly king. It's not an earthly king. Kings reigning with him, but they have no earthly king, and they go forth by bands, and for the most part you can go anywhere you want to in these United States and have the same type of assembly that you've got here this evening. And I'm telling you, that doesn't come from Nashville. It doesn't come from St. Louis. It doesn't come from it just comes from this Bible. And then the spider. The spider, boy, she's an amazing little... The spider taketh hold with her hands and is in kings' palaces. Have you ever been where there's not a spider? I don't believe you can go where there's not a spider. I remember Brother Jesse Bass, one thing I remember about his preaching, he said he was in Anton. We must be close to Anton. I believe he said Anton in a brand new bank. You ever hear him tell about that? A brand new bank, and they were talking about how good it was, and he looked up and there was a spider, and he quoted that text. I don't believe you can go where there's not a spider. She is called nature's mathematician. Now, sometime when you don't have anything better to do, look at a spider web in the morning when the sun's shining on it. And if you had time, somebody did it. I haven't done it yet. But if somebody measured those little strands. And do you know that they're all mathematically perfect? And do you know that the anchor to those things will just hold up on anything? It'll hold a big grasshopper. It'll hold a wind. It'll hold a heavy dew. And that thing is perfect. Every little thing is just perfect about it. And I'll give you this real quick. I have an uncle in Tennessee, and he says he's an engineer, and he is. But he's a mountain engineer, and he built him a swinging bridge across a stream. And he said, I came and I got stymied right here. I didn't know how to anchor. Up there in Tennessee, they have a lot of swinging bridges. 2 cables across. And he said, I came to my wit's end, and I did not know how to anchor this thing where it wouldn't swing. It kept swinging. And he said, you know what I did? You'd have to know my uncle to appreciate this. He said, I went and looked at a spider web. Said, I knew they had the best anchor in the world. And he said, you see this anchor going off over here? And it's in a chisel or a pin in a rock. And said, that stopped it, and that stopped it. Said, that's the way a spider web looks. Bridge is still there. But I want to tell you something. Most of us don't have too much to do for spiders. We don't really go after them too much. But I'm going to tell you something here. There's something to learn about this too. God's people may appear, even to themselves, to be insignificant. You know, one of the characteristics of one's humble poor, and I'm thinking of some right now. When you talk to them and you tell them about how faithful, and you try to tell them to continue to be faithful, not me. And that's not me. I've just been such a failure. I'm just not worthy. That's so forth. But I'm going to tell you what. When you take hold with your hands, whether it be in prayer, whether it be in speaking a kind word to somebody that's down and out, somebody that's in the rest home, somebody that can't come to the worship service, or whoever, when you can just say a kind word to them, or when you can do whatever you do, especially when you pray. You know what it's like? It's like a spider taking hold with your hands, and you're in king's palaces. No better place in the world to be than in king's palaces. May God bless you. I'm sorry I didn't notice my time better. But if I've said something, may the Lord bless it to your edification and to His honor. Thank you.
Word of Sovereign Grace, a ministry of Paradise Primitive Baptist Church in Arlington, Texas. Paradise Primitive Baptist Church is located at 5300 Mansfield Road in Arlington, Texas. Services begin at 10:30 each Sunday morning. Plan to come and worship with us. To find out more about Paradise Primitive Baptist Church, visit www.paradisepbc.org. Be sure to visit our website for articles, video, and audio sermons, as well as biblical answers to your questions. Thanks for watching, and be sure to join us again next week. May God richly bless you.